My wife used bedroom criticism as control, so I exposed her manipulation, reclaimed my confidence, and turned a toxic power game into awakening truth. She turned our bedroom into a courtroom where I was always the defendant. Every night became a performance review where nothing I did was ever good enough. That's exactly what happened when my wife decided to weaponize our most intimate moments to control every aspect of our marriage. It started subtly at first, small comments here and there about technique, timing, or enthusiasm. I thought she was just trying to improve our connection. So, I listened, I adjusted, I tried harder. But then the criticism became sharper, more personal, more calculated. My ex used to last longer, she'd say casually while getting dressed, or I was talking to my sister today, and she mentioned how her husband always makes sure she's satisfied first. These weren't suggestions for improvement. These were psychological attacks designed to make me question my worth as a man. The pattern became crystal clear during a dinner with her parents. She had been unusually demanding that week, criticizing everything from my approach to my stamina. When her father asked how married life was treating us, she smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, we're still working on some things. You know how men can be selfish sometimes." Her mother nodded sympathetically while I sat there, realizing she had just aired our private life to gain sympathy and control. But the real wake-up call came 3 months later. We were at a furniture store, and she wanted this expensive dining set we couldn't afford. When I suggested we wait until our finances improved, she pulled me aside and whispered, "Maybe if you were better at taking care of my needs, I'd be more motivated to take care of yours." Think about it. The message was clear: perform better in bed or face constant criticism and withheld affection. She had turned our intimacy into currency, and I was apparently always in debt. That night I lay awake analyzing every interaction we'd had over the past year. The pattern was undeniable. Whenever she wanted something, a vacation, expensive clothes, even simple decisions about our social life, the bedroom criticism would intensify. She had created a system where my masculinity was constantly under question, making me desperate to prove myself and more likely to give in to her demands. She would compare me to fictional characters from her romance novels, saying things like, "Why can't you be more passionate like him?" Or he would never finish before making sure she was completely satisfied. These weren't innocent fantasies. They were deliberate attempts to make me feel inadequate and replaceable. The breaking point came during our anniversary dinner. I had planned something special, but apparently my efforts from the night before hadn't met her standards. In front of the waiter, she made a joke about how some husbands know how to truly celebrate their wives. The waiter looked uncomfortable, and I felt something shift inside me. Not broken, not defeated, awakened. I realized she wasn't trying to improve our relationship. She was using our most vulnerable moments together as weapons to manipulate and control me. Every criticism was strategically timed to coincide with her wanting something. Every comparison was designed to make me feel like I needed to earn her approval and affection. But here's what she didn't count on. I'm not the type of man who stays down when someone tries to break him. I don't beg for validation or chase after approval that should be freely given in a marriage. Instead, I started paying attention to her tactics, analyzing her methods, and preparing my response. The woman who thought she could control me through criticism was about to learn what real control looked like. She had been playing checkers while I was about to show her chess. Her manipulation had awakened something in me that she definitely wasn't prepared to handle. The game was about to change completely, and she had no idea what was coming. The manipulation escalated the week after our anniversary. She wanted to redecorate the living room with furniture that would cost us 3 months of savings. When I questioned the expense, she didn't argue about money. Instead, she went straight for the jugular. "You know what? Maybe if you put half as much effort into pleasing me as you do into counting pennies, we wouldn't need to have this conversation." Then came the killer blow. My friend's husband just bought her a whole new bedroom set. Apparently, he knows how to show appreciation for what he gets at home. There it was, the bedroom criticism packaged as a shopping demand. Pay for expensive furniture or continue being reminded of your inadequacies as a lover. She had perfected this system, and honestly, it was almost impressive how calculated it was. But instead of feeling defeated or rushing to prove myself, I did something different. I looked at her calmly and said, "That's interesting. Tell me more about this friend's husband." She seemed confused by my response, expecting either anger or immediate compliance. "Well, he treats her right, you know. He makes sure she's happy in every way." She was doubling down, thinking she had found my weak spot. I nodded thoughtfully. "And you think buying furniture will solve our bedroom issues?" The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on using intimacy as leverage that she hadn't expected me to address it directly. It's about showing that you care, she stammered, realizing her manipulation was being exposed. Right? So, let me get this straight. You criticize my performance, then suggest I should spend money we don't have to prove I care about you. That's an interesting business model. My tone was calm, almost amused. She didn't know how to respond to that. Over the next few days, I started documenting the pattern. Every time she wanted something, the bedroom criticism would appear like clockwork. New car, you never take your time with anything, including me. Girls' trip with friends, maybe some time apart will help you figure out how to be a better husband. The beauty of her system was that it attacked my ego while making her demands seem reasonable. After all, what kind of husband doesn't want to satisfy his wife? But I had figured out her game, and I wasn't playing by her rules anymore. The turning point came when her sister visited. They were in the kitchen talking about their husbands, and I could hear every word from the living room. My wife was complaining about how I just don't get it when it comes to romance and intimacy. Her sister was offering sympathy and advice about training husbands to be more attentive. That's when I realized she wasn't just using this manipulation on me. She was getting validation and advice from other women about how to control men through bedroom criticism. This was a learned behavior, possibly passed down through generations of women who thought manipulation was preferable to honest communication. But here's where she made her crucial mistake. She assumed I would continue to respond like a typical husband, apologetic, eager to please, and willing to buy my way back into her good graces. She had no idea that her tactics had actually revealed her own weaknesses to me. I started responding to her criticism with complete indifference. When she complained about my technique, I'd shrug and say, okay. When she compared me to other men, I'd respond with, that's nice. No anger, no defensiveness, no desperate attempts to prove myself. Just calm acknowledgement followed by zero behavior change. This wasn't what she expected. Her criticism was supposed to motivate me to try harder, spend more, and bend to her will. Instead, it was being met with the kind of confidence that suggested I didn't need her validation to know my worth. The frustration in her voice became obvious. Don't you care about making me happy? She asked after I responded to another comparison with complete indifference. I care about making my wife happy, I replied calmly. But I don't negotiate with emotional terrorists. The room went silent. She hadn't expected me to call out her behavior so directly. For the first time in months, she was the one feeling uncomfortable during these conversations. Her manipulation had been so effective because it targeted my insecurities and desire to be a good husband. But once I recognized it as manipulation, it lost all its power. You can't shame someone who refuses to accept undeserved shame. The woman who thought she could control me through criticism was about to discover that real power doesn't come from tearing someone down. It comes from being so secure in yourself that other people's opinions become irrelevant. She was about to learn the difference between manipulation and actual influence. My new approach threw her completely off balance. She had built her entire control system around my reactions. And now those reactions had vanished. The woman who used to make me defensive with a single comment was now struggling to get any emotional response at all. The shift became obvious during a dinner party at her colleague's house. She was telling a story about how her friend's husband had surprised her with a weekend getaway, then looked at me with that familiar expression. Some men just know how to be spontaneous and romantic. Right, honey? In the past, I would have felt embarrassed, maybe even promised to plan something similar. Instead, I smiled and said, absolutely. Some men also know the difference between romance and bribery. The table went quiet for a moment before her colleague's husband actually chuckled. Bribery? My wife asked, clearly not expecting that response. You know, when someone does nice things expecting specific rewards in return. Real romance doesn't come with strings attached. I took a sip of wine while she processed being called out in public. Her colleague's wife looked intrigued. That's an interesting perspective. So, you think some romantic gestures are actually manipulative? I think healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, not performance-based reward systems. I glanced at my wife, who was now visibly uncomfortable. Don't you agree, sweetheart? She couldn't disagree without looking like she supported manipulation, but agreeing meant admitting her own tactics were wrong. She forced a smile and changed the subject, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. On the drive home, she was unusually quiet. Finally, she spoke. You embarrassed me tonight. How so? I asked calmly. That whole thing about bribery and performance. People are going to think our marriage has problems. I couldn't help but laugh. Our marriage does have problems. The difference is I'm not pretending otherwise anymore. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done playing games where you criticize me into compliance. You want something? Ask for it directly. Want to improve our intimacy? Let's have an honest conversation. But this manipulation disguised as relationship advice ends now. She tried a different approach the next week. Instead of criticism, she attempted seduction followed by requests. The morning after we were intimate, she casually mentioned a spa weekend her friends were planning. It would be so nice to relax with the girls. What do you think? I think you should go if you want to go, I replied, not taking the bait. Well, it's pretty expensive. Then save up for it. She looked confused. But I thought, last night was really nice. It was. What does that have to do with a spa weekend? She was realizing that intimacy was no longer currency in our relationship. It wasn't something she could use to purchase compliance or guilt me into spending money. It was just what married couples do when they want to connect with each other. Her frustration grew as her old tactics continued to fail. She tried returning to direct criticism, but my responses had evolved. When she complained about my enthusiasm, I'd say, "That's unfortunate. Maybe we should see a marriage counselor to work on communication." When she compared me to other men, I'd respond with, "Sounds like you've given this a lot of thought. Maybe you should pursue that instead of settling for what you clearly consider inadequate." These weren't angry responses. They were delivered with the kind of calm confidence that comes from knowing your worth isn't determined by someone else's approval. And that confidence was driving her crazy. The breaking point came when she tried to escalate during an argument about household responsibilities. "You know what your problem is? You think you're some kind of alpha male, but you can't even satisfy your own wife." I looked at her for a long moment, then started laughing. Not angry laughter or nervous laughter, but genuine amusement. "What's so funny?" she demanded. "I just realized something. You've been so focused on trying to control me through criticism that you forgot to actually communicate what you want. It's like watching someone try to drive a car by honking the horn. Here's the thing. A confident man doesn't need constant validation from his wife, but a secure wife doesn't need to tear down her husband to feel powerful. So which one of us really has the problem here?" She had no answer for that. For months, she had been the one asking questions, making demands, and controlling conversations. Now she was on the receiving end of direct confrontation, and she didn't know how to handle it. The woman who thought she could break me down with criticism was discovering that confidence is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. And mine was getting stronger every day. Her manipulation had backfired completely. Instead of creating a desperate, compliant husband, she had awakened someone who wouldn't accept disrespect in any form. The power dynamic she had worked so hard to establish was about to flip entirely. Desperation makes people dangerous, and my wife was becoming desperate. When subtle manipulation failed, she decided to go nuclear. The woman who used to whisper criticisms in private was now ready to make our problems everyone else's business. It happened at her mother's birthday dinner. We were sitting with her entire family when she started telling a story about a marriage counselor she'd heard on a podcast. She was talking about how some men just can't accept feedback about their performance. They get all defensive instead of trying to improve. Her aunt nodded sympathetically. Men have such fragile egos when it comes to that stuff. My wife looked directly at me. Right? Like if your wife is trying to help you become a better lover, why wouldn't you want to listen? The table went quiet. Her mother looked uncomfortable, and her father was studying his plate like it contained the secrets of the universe. She had just aired our intimate life to her entire family, thinking public shame would force me back into compliance. Instead, I set down my fork and smiled. "That's fascinating. Tell me more about this podcast." She seemed surprised by my calm response. "Well, she just talks about communication and relationships." "No, the part about performance feedback. Because I'm curious, in your experience, is there a difference between constructive feedback and emotional manipulation?" Her mother's eyebrows went up. This wasn't the defensive reaction my wife had expected. What do you mean?" she stammered. "Well, constructive feedback focuses on solutions and improvement. Manipulation uses shame and comparison to control behavior. So, when someone constantly compares their partner to other people, or uses intimacy as leverage for unrelated demands, which category would you put that in?" The silence was deafening. Her father actually looked up from his plate, clearly interested in where this was going. "I think," her mother said carefully, "that married couples should be able to discuss anything privately." I nodded. Absolutely. Privacy is crucial for healthy relationships, which makes me wonder why some people choose to discuss intimate details in public settings. I looked around the table, almost like they're trying to shame their partner into compliance rather than actually solve problems. My wife's face was turning red. "You're twisting everything around." "Am I?" Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you just told your family that I'm a bad lover who can't take feedback. That's either incredibly poor judgment or deliberate humiliation. Which one should I assume? Her sister tried to intervene. Maybe we should change the subject. Good idea, I agreed. But first, I want everyone to know that if my wife has concerns about our relationship, I'm always willing to discuss them privately. However, I won't tolerate being humiliated in public as a manipulation tactic, just so we're all clear on where I stand. The rest of the dinner was awkward, but I had made my point. She had tried to weaponize her family against me and instead had exposed her own behavior as inappropriate and manipulative. The drive home was tense. I can't believe you embarrassed me like that, she said. You embarrassed yourself. I just refuse to be collateral damage. My family thinks you're controlling now. I laughed. Your family thinks you air your dirty laundry at birthday dinners. There's a difference. She tried a different approach the following week. Threats. Maybe I should just find someone who appreciates me, she said during another manufactured argument. Maybe you should, I replied, calmly. That wasn't the reaction she wanted. You don't even care if I leave. I care about being in a relationship with someone who respects me. If you're not that person, then we don't belong together. So you're just going to give up on our marriage? I'm not giving up on anything. I'm just not going to negotiate with threats anymore. You want to leave? Leave. You want to work on our problems like adults? I'm here, but I'm done being manipulated. Her final desperate move came 2 weeks later. She had been building up to something, and I could sense it coming. During dinner, she dropped the bomb. I've been thinking about what would make me happy in this marriage, she began, and I think we need some major changes, or I'm going to have to consider other options such as, well, maybe an open marriage since you clearly can't meet all my needs. There it was, the ultimate threat. Submit to her demands, or she'd find satisfaction elsewhere. It was manipulation at its most toxic level. I finished chewing my food, wiped my mouth with my napkin, and looked at her calmly. That's interesting. So your solution to our problems is to threaten infidelity? It's not a threat. It's a practical solution. No, it's an ultimatum. And here's mine, you can have an open marriage or you can have this marriage, but you can't have both. You're being unreasonable. I'm being clear. You spent months trying to control me through criticism, public humiliation, and now threats of infidelity. None of that is going to work because I don't negotiate with emotional terrorists. She sat there speechless. Every weapon in her arsenal had been neutralized. The woman who thought she could break me down had instead created someone who was absolutely unbreakable. Her nuclear option had just exploded in her face. After her ultimatum backfired, she retreated for 3 days. No criticism, no manipulation, just cold silence. She was regrouping, and I knew she was planning one final assault. When someone has built their entire identity around controlling others, they don't surrender easily. Her last desperate move came disguised as vulnerability. She approached me with tears in her eyes, claiming she had been talking to her therapist about our problems. I realize I may have been too critical, she began. But it's only because I love you and want us to be better together. This was her Hail Mary. After months of direct confrontation failed, she was trying the victim approach, paint herself as someone who was just trying to help, making me the bad guy for not appreciating her efforts. I see, I said calmly. And what did your therapist suggest? She said that sometimes when women feel unfulfilled, they might express it in ways that seem critical, but are really just cries for help. I almost admired the strategy. Reframe months of manipulation as emotional distress. Make her behavior seem understandable while positioning me as the insensitive husband who couldn't recognize his wife's pain. That's an interesting perspective, I replied. What else did she say? She seemed encouraged by my apparent receptiveness. Well, she thinks we should work on rebuilding our connection. Maybe start with small gestures and better communication. Communication is definitely important, I agreed. In fact, I've been keeping track of our communication patterns. Her face changed slightly. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and opened a notes app. I started documenting things a few months ago, to better understand our dynamic. You've been taking notes on our conversations? Just the important ones. Like the time you told your family I was a bad lover at your mother's birthday dinner. Or when you suggested an open marriage. Or the 17 times you compared me to other men in bed. She went pale. You can't be serious. March 15th, you said I was selfish in bed because I wouldn't buy you that expensive purse. April 3rd, you compared me to your ex after I questioned spending money on your friend's bachelorette party. Should I continue? That's manipulative. You were spying on me. I couldn't help but laugh. I was documenting my wife's behavior in my own marriage. But you're right about one thing. Manipulation was definitely happening. This is crazy. You can't just record everything I say. I didn't record anything. I took notes about my own experiences. Big difference. And those experiences paint a pretty clear picture of someone using bedroom criticism to control their husband's behavior. She was scrambling. Now you're making it sound worse than it was. Am I? Because from my notes, there's a direct correlation between you wanting something and me suddenly becoming inadequate as a lover. Almost like clockwork. The tears were gone now, replaced by anger. You have no right to analyze me like some kind of experiment. I have every right to understand what's happening in my own marriage. And what's happening is that you've been systematically trying to break down my confidence to make me more compliant. That's not true. I started reading from my phone. Quote, maybe if you were better at taking care of my needs, I'd be more motivated to take care of yours. That was about a dining set. Or this one, you never take your time with anything, including me. That was about a car, stop it. Quote, some men just know how to be spontaneous and romantic. That was at dinner with your colleagues when you wanted me to plan an expensive vacation. I said, stop, the pattern is pretty clear. You criticize my performance, then make a demand. When I don't comply immediately, you escalate the criticism or bring other people into it. She was completely exposed now. All her tactics laid bare with dates, times, and contexts. The woman who thought she was subtly manipulating me had been as predictable as a stopwatch. This is emotional abuse, she said desperately. You're trying to control me with data. I'm trying to understand my wife's behavior using actual facts instead of emotional manipulation. But you're right about the abuse part. It was definitely happening. She had nothing left. No tears, no threats, no manipulation could overcome documented evidence of her own behavior. For months, she had been gaslighting me into believing I was the problem. Now she was confronted with proof that she had been the one creating problems. So what now? She asked quietly. Now you decide what kind of wife you want to be, because the one who tries to control her husband through bedroom criticism is done. I won't tolerate it anymore. And I have documentation to prove it's been happening. You'd actually use that against me? I'd use it to protect myself from someone who thinks marriage is a power game instead of a partnership. The woman who had spent months making me question my worth was now questioning her own tactics. Her manipulation had been so thoroughly exposed that even she couldn't deny what she'd been doing. She had tried to break me down systematically, but instead had built me up into someone who wouldn't accept disrespect from anyone, including her. The game was over, and she had lost completely. The transformation was immediate and complete. Once she realized her manipulation had been thoroughly documented and exposed, the bedroom criticism stopped entirely. Not gradually, not with occasional relapses. It vanished overnight like it had never existed. Suddenly, the woman who had spent months finding fault with everything I did couldn't find anything to criticize. It was almost comical how quickly someone who claimed to have legitimate concerns about our intimacy discovered that those concerns weren't actually important when they couldn't be used as weapons. The silence was telling. No more comparisons to other men. No more strategic criticism timed with her demands. No more public humiliation disguised as relationship advice. She had finally realized that her manipulation had not only failed, but had created documentation of her abusive behavior. But the real change wasn't just in what she stopped doing. It was in how she started acting around me. The confident, controlling woman who used to dominate conversations and dictate terms was now careful, almost hesitant. She had learned that I wasn't someone who could be broken down or manipulated, and that knowledge changed everything. When she wanted something, now she asked directly. No games, no manipulation, no using our intimate life as leverage. I'd like to visit my sister next weekend. Is that okay with you? Simple, respectful, honest communication. Something she apparently knew how to do all along. The difference was striking. Months of supposed communication problems solved overnight once manipulation was no longer an option. It turned out she didn't have trouble expressing herself clearly. She just preferred using psychological warfare instead of honest conversation. Our relationship improved dramatically once she stopped trying to control it, without constant criticism poisoning every interaction. We actually started connecting again. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who claimed to want better intimacy had been the one preventing it through her toxic behavior. The bedroom dynamics changed completely. Instead of performance anxiety created by constant criticism, there was actual chemistry again. When someone stops making you feel inadequate, you stop acting inadequate. Confidence is attractive, and mine had been rebuilt stronger than ever. Her friends noticed the change too. At a recent gathering, I overheard one of them asking why she seemed different lately. You're not complaining about your husband anymore. Did something change? She glanced at me across the room and said quietly, I realized I was the problem, not him. That moment of honesty was worth more than all her previous apologies combined. She wasn't just admitting she was wrong, she was taking ownership of the damage she had caused. The woman who used to air our private business to gain sympathy and support now defended our relationship when others tried to criticize me. When her sister made a comment about men being selfish, my wife actually stood up for me. That's not fair. My husband is actually very considerate. The transformation extended beyond our marriage too. She stopped seeking validation from other women about how to manage or control her husband. The toxic friend group that used to reinforce her manipulative behavior suddenly seemed less appealing when she was no longer playing their games. 6 months later, our marriage was stronger than it had been in years. Not because we had solved some deep compatibility issue, but because one person had stopped being abusive, and the other had refused to tolerate abuse. The bedroom criticism that she had used as a weapon was replaced by actual communication about preferences and desires. When someone feels safe being vulnerable, they can actually be vulnerable. When criticism is constructive rather than manipulative, people want to improve. She learned that respect has to be mutual to be meaningful. You can't demand to be treated well while treating your partner poorly. Control through manipulation always backfires eventually because it destroys the very thing you're trying to control. I learned that confidence isn't about never doubting yourself. It's about not letting other people's manipulation define your worth. A secure person doesn't need to tear down their partner to feel powerful. The woman who tried to control me through bedroom criticism ended up with a husband who was completely uncontrollable, and she discovered that was exactly what she actually wanted. She just hadn't known how to ask for it without using manipulation. Now she had a man who couldn't be broken, manipulated, or controlled. Someone who demanded respect and gave it in return. Someone who knew his worth and wouldn't negotiate it away for anyone. She had wanted to control a weak man but ended up creating a strong one. And that strong man was exactly what she needed, even if it wasn't what she thought she wanted. The criticism stopped because it was never about performance. It was about power. Once she lost the power to manipulate, she lost the desire to criticize. The bedroom became a place of connection instead of control. And our marriage became a partnership instead of a power struggle. She learned the hard way that you get what you tolerate in relationships. I'd stopped tolerating disrespect, and suddenly, disrespect disappeared. The woman who used bedroom criticism for control discovered that real control comes from being with someone who chooses to stay, not someone who's too broken to leave. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you